Hello, everyone. My name is Yusuf from the Middle East program at the Wilson Center. Thank you for coming today and being part of this discussion. I'm going to let Mark Greens, our CEO and president, pre-record the remarks, play, and then we're going to start the conversation. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those joining us in Washington, D.C. or from around the world. I'm Ambassador Mark Green, President and CEO of the Wilson Center, and I want to welcome you to today's discussion of Gaza Day After Stabilization, which we're doing in partnership with our friends at the Atlantic Council. These are consequential times for every part of the world, but perhaps nowhere more so than in the Middle East. Developments there continue to capture the headlines as war brings even greater instability to the region. The Hamas terrorist attack on October 7 has fundamentally changed the Middle East. As President Biden accurately put it, October 7 marks an inflection point in the region. Every day that has passed since then is a difficult day. Hamas is still holding over 100 hostages, including Americans, and countless Palestinians are suffering from a humanitarian catastrophe. We must take steps to ensure that an attack like October 7th doesn't happen again. At the same time, we must do everything we can to help those in desperate need of assistance receive help unabated. More access is needed for delivering assistance and also better oversight. We need to help ensure that it is going to the right people and right places. We don't have the luxury of merely looking at this moment. We need to put a plan together on the day after stabilization and reconstruction of Gaza, so policymakers have informed recommendations and options as they look towards the future. This work can open the door to new diplomatic initiatives and security enhancements that can change the entire region for the better. Getting stabilization and reconstruction right is also essential for the well-being of Gazans who have suffered so much from war and decades of Hamas control. A stable and secure Gaza is also essential for the Israeli people to live in peace. A group of former American and Israeli officials, including the Wilson Center's Jim Jeffrey, has put together an informed, innovative plan for Gaza the day after. And today we are delighted to host the plan's rollout and to have the authors discuss its specifics. The authors have drawn on their senior-level stabilization experience in the Balkans and the Middle East, as well as other historical examples. Those experiences and examples point to what works and what doesn't. What distinguishes the successful experiences is strong American engagement and involvement, including at least some troop presence. The unity of all elements of international engagement, from security to governance and reconstruction, to clear linkage of international efforts with local players' adherence to security provisions. Success also requires a vision for eventual reconciliation and de-radicalization. Once again, thank you so much for joining us for this important discussion, and it's my honor to turn things over to our partners at the Atlantic Council.
Thank you, Mark. It's an honor, as always, to work with you and with the Wilson Center. I'm honored to co-host today's event, A Plan for Post-War Gaza. The aftermath of the October 7th Hamas-led attacks continues to reverberate across the Middle East and far beyond, with more than 1,000 Israelis killed and more than 100 Israeli hostages still unaccounted for, with more than 30,000 Palestinians killed and protests unfolding around the world. The specter of conflict and the specter of escalating conflict persists. Yet, amid this turmoil, we must acknowledge that a moment will arise when the fighting ends. A moment will come when the world needs to confront a crucial question: what should come next? Much akin to the post-World War II era, we stand on the brink of shaping a path forward, both for Palestinians and Israelis. Will the world step forward as a partner and advocate for Gaza's reconstruction? Or will the world risk allowing conflict to return in a few years' time, potentially exploited by hostile actors? These are pivotal decisions that lie before us. The launch of this excellent report today, drafted and overseen by experts with extensive government experience in post-war planning, including the Atlantic Council Senior Fellow Tom Warwick. This report seeks to address some of the most urgent questions and challenges associated with post-war Gaza. It is time to look for creative solutions based on historical successes and other lessons that can be replicated or adapted to post-war Gaza. For example, a multinational authority overseen by an international contact group, an international policing force to temporarily administer Gaza, establishing security and removing Hamas control of civil governance, starting Gaza's physical and social reconstruction and providing for a better life for the people of Gaza to live in security, in opportunity, and in dignity alongside the State of Israel, culminating in a transition to local Palestinian governance and security responsibility once conditions are met. We at the Atlantic Council are proud to be part of this effort to start the conversation in a serious way to address the future of Gaza. And we're also proud to work together with the Wilson Center. So thank you and good day.
Thank you to both Ambassador Green and Fred Kemp, President of the Atlantic Council, for these introductory remarks. My name is Marissa Khurma, and I'm the Director of the Middle East Program here at the Wilson Center, and I'll be moderating today's discussion on this report. But before I turn this over to the authors, two of which are with us today, Ambassador Jim Jeffrey and Tim Warwick of the Atlantic Council, as well as our discussant, the Honorable Mary Beth Long, I wanted to set the stage for where we are today. Today is May 7th. It marks month 7 of the horrific Hamas attacks on Israel that killed 1,200 Israelis and resulted in the capture of more than 200 hostages, more than 100 of which are still held hostage by Hamas, their families awaiting and hoping for their safe return. Israeli society, as Secretary Blinken noted this past weekend, is traumatized by this attack. Today also marks 7 months since Israel's war in Gaza, that to date has killed 35,000 Palestinians in the Strip, 70% of which are women and children. The Gaza Strip is one of the most densely populated areas in the world, but it's not the same place it was on October 6th. 60% of homes have been completely destroyed. Gaza's health system has been decimated. Schools, churches, and mosques have been destroyed. And according to the latest reports, more than 1 million Palestinians in Gaza are on the verge of famine. The economy is also completely decimated, with over 85% unemployment in the labor force. Palestinians and their relatives in the West Bank, as Secretary Blinken also noted this past weekend, are traumatized. According to a recent report published in January, it will take 35 years for Gaza's economy to be restored to the 2023 levels, if and only if it grows at 10%. And so, needless to say, the challenges are monumental, and the road ahead is a difficult one with two traumatized societies. But today's discussion is an essential one about the day after. Before I turn it over to Ambassador Jim Jeffrey to tell us a little bit more about how this report came together, I want to turn it over to you, Mary Beth, to help us set the stage for where we are at. You've just returned from a trip to the region, and you spoke to officials across the board. You've also read the report, so perhaps you can give us a sense of where we are at with the various stakeholders in the region.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to thank Marissa, who's always generous, and the Wilson Center for giving us this opportunity to take a look at this report, and for Ambassador Jeffries and Tom for taking this on. I read it last night. I'm sure most of you, a lot of interesting topics to talk about in the report. What I'm just going to focus my remarks on is having spent the better part of 10 days in the region and met with Gulf Arabs, senior leadership, military, some reconstruction, humanitarian type organizations. Took a long look at the floating dock, or however you want to describe the facility being built off of Gaza, how they're going to, what the plans are to get that integrated into a reconstruction or a humanitarian relief effort. spoke with Yemeni officials, Jordanians, Israelis, of course, across the board. And I just wanted to tease out, I mean, we all saw what's happening over the weekend, and I think there were some eyebrows raised, particularly in the Gulf Arabs, about what appeared to be confusion, if not, I know it says don't adjust mic, so I didn't touch it. Maybe some narrative digression on what, if anything, really did happen with the acceptance of a possible treaty that the U.S. either did or didn't coordinate with the Israelis or all the Israelis as far as what Hamas accepted as part of the Egyptian package. And that, of course, coincided with a really important effort that, if you speak to the Israeli military, is part of their effort to squash the 4 battalions and the leadership who they believe are in or near Rafah of Hamas for once and for all, and not to leave this effort, however you want to characterize it, until the leadership in those military units are destroyed and dismantled. Realizing that that will evoke, by necessity, a tremendous amount of local and international criticism, that while they've done everything they believe that they can to remove or to isolate as many civilians and civilian support facilities from that effort, that there will be civilian loss, unfortunately, and that there'll be a substantial amount of criticism. But a real hard position, which I think, frankly, I saw shared in most of the Arab leadership, which was, until we kill Hamas as a military organization, although the idea of Hamas is a hurdle that will have to be challenged, all this talk of policing and stabilization and who does what is good because we need to prepare, but it's woefully premature. And that the real trick will be how that dovetails, of course, and this is what the gentleman's report focuses on, at least as the initial phase, how the Israelis exit Gaza and what goes in its place as a policing force or as in what will be, I think, either a hostile or a quasi-permissible environment at its best. I just wanted to pull really 4 themes that I thought were overwhelmingly what I heard. And I did speak to Israeli former and current folk. I did not speak with anyone who is involved in the cabinet per se, nor did I get myself involved in internal Israeli politics. So I'll just sort of back off of that one for now. The first thing is overwhelmingly the region believes that this has to be a regional solution, and that all care must be taken, whether outside and how outside help is provided. That's a no-brainer. What kind of form that outside help comes in, I think, frankly, the carpet is wide open from soup to nuts, not just humanitarian, but they realize that there's a lot of capacity in the policing and the security stabilization aspect that they'll probably have to go out for outside help, but that the narrative has to be that this is a Palestinian effort by and for Palestinians. And whether that is a narrative that is overwhelmed or subsumed with impracticalities at the initial phase is going to be very important how that's handled. And while there's a multinational role that they envision, and particularly the Gulf Arabs, who that is responding to, and as what part of a stepped process that turns over Gaza to Palestinian control is as important functionally as it is in the narrative, because without exception, everyone I spoke to said the narrative is overtaking the reality in many practical ways, and in fact is driving the reality in important ways that we don't think the West understands. And that is having the word a trusteeship has been thrown around in some sectors, a multinational force occupation the occupation word, of course, being something totally unacceptable, but the verbiage is important. And it's not only important for Gaza, but it's critical to keep Iran at bay. And they see that one of the narratives the West is not understanding, particularly with the public dialogue of the plight of Palestinian and of Gazans, is also that there's an opportunistic predator lying in wait, and the way that the transition and the policing and the securing of Gaza as a territory either is going to play into the hands of Iran, with huge implications not only for Gaza but for Jordan and other and Israel in particular, and that we've taken our eye off that ball a little bit, and it is keenly where a lot of their attention. They see the Palestine issue is part of a much bigger, not separate issue. The second thing is the willingness of the Gulf Arabs, in particular, some amazing ideas. We just heard about the estimate that at 10% a year, it'll take 20, 25 years. I know that Dubai in particular, the Emirates in general, but Egypt are looking to make Gaza, something of a free zone in some respects, run by Palestinians to the benefit of Palestinians with the appropriate infrastructure and economic activities. For those of you who follow these things closely, the amount of billions that the Emirates have recently put into underdeveloped regions of Egypt is just an example of the power of that kind of an aggressive move could take to, frankly, a geographically well-positioned area, Gaza. The Indians have expressed interest, so there's lots of opportunities here. The question is, again, how it is phased in and the packaging of, is this for Gazans or is this for Palestinians, or is this an opportunity for, I mentioned Iran, but there are also some sensitivities as to the U.S. profile. This can't become another conversation about occupiers, about colonialization on behalf of Israel, Israel taking over parts of Gaza or being the puppet master behind Gaza, and the U.S. With another foray into the Middle East. A lot of optimism. I think the one thing that everyone also agreed in is the problem of the overwhelming problem of lack of leadership. Who's going to do it? Who's going to take the initiative? Who's going to pull the team together? And what is that team looking like? And how does that team basically keep themselves out of internal Israeli politics, where you have perhaps a bifurcation of Israeli thinking as to what role a two-state solution might have, when that role or that dialogue, is it starting at the conversation? Every Palestinian I spoke to and the Palestinian Authority says that's where we have to start, ground one, is that this is a two-state solution as a foundational principle, and everything that is done is an effort towards that goal. Some Israelis were very open to that idea as a path to, not unlike the path to NATO membership. Several of them reminded me of Ukraine and Georgia. The path can be long and wide and take many turns. Several people that I spoke to, so that's just a non-starter. There's too much to handle at the beginning. The last thing we need to do is take on the everlasting question. The real fear as a practical issue that we all walked away with was it's going to be a messy couple of weeks, if not months, and people need to be patient. But we also need to start disciplining ourselves, and disconnects and international disconnects like the one we had this past weekend where one player seems to be moving either with or without the tacit approval of the other are not helpful. It doesn't give confidence in the fact that any one or two players are going to be able to formulate a plan that everybody can sign up for when you have some of the main folk working or appearing to work moving in opposite directions.
Thank you so much, Mary. This was a very comprehensive readout and very interesting themes, and I think they fit very well with the conversation that we will now kick off about this report. So, Ambassador Jeffrey, if you can tell us how this report came about. What I thought was very useful in your introduction is that you present what this report includes and what it does not do as
Yeah.
well. So please.
Thank you. Thank you, Marissa. First of all, I'd like to thank Mark Green, Fred Kempe, the Wilson Center, and the Atlantic Council, and particularly my MEP team led by Marissa for putting this together for us and providing the platform for us to make this presentation to the public. I want to underline that this is not a Wilson Center or Atlantic Council report. This is a report done by Tom and I and a number of other authors from the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune, Aaron Lehrman and Robert Silverman, as well as General Keith Dayton, and several others have participated that we're not naming today. The product, again, it's our product, has not been endorsed by anyone, but we have shared it with many people, and I'll get into that in a second. But first of all, how did it come about? Basically, after October 7th, I and a number of other people associated with the product were writing op-eds and involved in other discussions on the day after, humanitarian concerns and other issues, and this caught the attention of people both here and in Israel. And eventually, folks started saying, hey, we don't see any plan by either the United States or Israel for the day after. The Israeli plan, such as it is, at least publicly, was a variant of the Israeli army stays on and you find local people. No one outside of Israel and many inside Israel don't think that that has any legs, and we agree. The U.S. came up with the 5 no's, one of which was Hamas shall not govern in Gaza. The others were all basically focused on what Israel can't do, stay on, annex parts of Gaza, drive people away. And we decided that we could come up with a plan that was consistent with the U.S. 5 no's, and that would reflect what we thought the needs of all parties, beginning with, and this is the most important thing, the people of Gaza. They are the focus of this and any other effort. But that focus cannot just be of people of goodwill. That focus has to be based upon experience and realities and hard decisions, and that was the approach we took. And so we started working on the plan. By this time, we had heard that the United States, while it was pushing an eventual Palestinian Authority takeover of Gaza, came to the same conclusion many of us had come to, that the Palestinian Authority is not in any position to move in when the Israelis leave, even if the Israelis were going to turn it over to them. Rather, it would take some kind of interim presence. President Macron of France mentioned the de-ISIS coalition as one model early on, which is something that caught my attention, having run the political side of that for a while in the U.S. government. And there were other ideas that the administration was floating about some kind of international interim presence. So we worked on the basis of that, what we had heard from folks in Israel, and the 5 no's to come up with this plan, which I would say is generally consistent with what the administration is thinking, although there are some significant differences. We based this upon experience of 3 sorts. First of all, our own experience, as Mark Green said, we've all been involved in this, in Iraq, in Syria, in the case of General Dayton in the West Bank. Secondly, the experience from a historical standpoint. This sort of thing has been done many times in the last 50 years. And Marissa laid out the horrific damage and the very challenging situation. But actually, the international community has dealt, well or badly, with even bigger disasters. It's a question of organization and the right approach. Some things work and some things don't. What we saw not working, for example, is UN peacekeeping operations. We saw that in Bosnia, UNPROFOR. We see this every day in UNIFIL, southern Lebanon. We saw it in the Sinai before 1967, and on and on and on. The second thing is we're skeptical of Arab League initiatives being able to accomplish a lot. We are very, very skeptical of Israeli stabilization efforts. They had roughly 20 years experience in Lebanon, and they've had a fair amount of experience in Gaza and the West Bank, and it has not been all that fruitful. So there's a lot that didn't work. What we saw that did work, and again, Macron was right with the de-ISIS coalition, involves several things. First of all, an informal, not formal organizational structure. There are problems with international organizations I won't get into. It's beyond the scope of this, but trust me, having lived with those problems for 40 years, they're very, very hard to surmount. Secondly, as Mark Green said, U.S. leadership. In every case that succeeded, there was U.S. leadership. What are some of the examples? Bosnia, after 1995, Kosovo, the de-ISIS campaign that Macron said. I would say Iraq in that middle period from roughly 2007 to 2010. And in several other areas, we've been able to put together the MFO from the standpoint of peacekeeping. We've been able to put together operations that have met the minimum requirements to keep the peace, keep stability, and bring a better life to one or another degree to the people that are the focus of everybody's attention. The elements of this success beyond U.S. leadership and a informal international coalition is a broad base. Typically, because very few of these have taken place other than in the Middle East or the Balkans, it's involved Europeans, Americans, the Islamic world, particularly Arab states, and international organizations playing supporting roles. Another element has been not just U.S. leadership, but frankly, and this is a very unpopular theme with this administration or any administration, is U.S. troops on the ground. That's part of our plan. We don't think there needs to be many. However, it's been our experience, and I can only cite my own, but it's been extensive and dramatic. If we don't put troops on the ground, nobody else will. Nobody else will put troops on the ground that will do anything serious. If we put troops on the ground, if we have skin in the game, others are willing to come along. So we built that into the plan. The third experience we brought is from having been involved in foreign affairs, particularly in the Middle East, over, in my case, 50 years since the Yom Kippur War, when I was a captain in the Army, and we were put on just short of nuclear alert when the Russians all but intervened in Egypt, forward. And what we perceived was that this is not just one of the many struggles that you roll your eyes at in the Middle East. Since 2000, Israel has fought many campaigns 7 times. I think 4 times with Hamas, the Intifada with the Palestinians, Lebanon in 2006, and ongoing for about 5 years now in Syria, more than 5 years. And so it becomes part of the routine, and that's within the larger context of Iran and proxies pushing throughout the region, particularly the wars in Yemen, Syria, and Iraq. So people sometimes think, well, what's different? This is different. This has changed the Middle East, period. Whether it changes it for the better or for the worse, that's up to governments and peoples throughout the region, beginning with the people of the region. It thus is analogous to Yom Kippur in 1973, that war and everything that followed that in the Middle East, and I would say the liberation of Kuwait in 1991 and everything that followed that. You'll remember Oslo Accords, the Madrid Conference, Jordanian recognition of Israel, and on and on. So this is one of those moments, and we think that it gives us the opportunity to mobilize resources and people and governments. So what is the plan and what is it not? First of all, we don't talk about a timeline. We don't know how long it will take for this plan to work. That's a question of conditions, leadership, luck, significant events on the ground. Secondly, we don't talk about the day before. In fact, this was one of the criticisms that the U.S. government raised, because we have shared this extensively with the Israeli and U.S. governments as well as others. But again, this hasn't been endorsed by anybody. We've listened to some ideas and not to others. But folks in the U.S. government said, well, you're just assuming that Gaza will be not at peace, but Hamas will no longer be effectively in charge and that the level of violence will be relatively low. And our answer is yes, we're assuming that. But show me the plan that doesn't assume that. And frankly, there is none. If Hamas winds up controlling Gaza from the standpoint of governance and monopoly or quasi-monopoly of force, folks, there is no reconstruction of Gaza. Nobody's going to put tens of billions of dollars into an entity governed by Hamas after what has happened since the 7th of October, because the assumption everybody will make is that Hamas will then use it to blow it, the whole place up, or to provoke Israel and get the whole place blown up again. So therefore, there has to be some day before. We just don't detail how that will come about. Secondly, we don't talk about the day after, beyond saying that Palestinian control is the ultimate successor to this interim temporary international presence. And there were specific reasons for that, largely because there is a difference between the United States, states in the region, and Israel on whether the Palestinian Authority should play that role. I personally think it should play that role, assuming that it has been assisted in developing the capability to do so. But that's a personal view. The point is that's something that has to be negotiated between the parties. All we maintain is that there has to be an end state to the international presence, and it has to be replaced by Palestinian control. What that Palestinian control will look like is beyond the terms of this agreement and gets into huge issues of the region, the Abraham Accords, Israeli-Palestinian peace, and on and on. The plan is modular, and people are obviously can do with it what they want or pick and choose. However, we would urge that folks pay attention to the basic logic of it. The international community, including international organizations, the UN, specialized agencies, and on, are very good at coming up with operational plans, gathering money and resources, and working in very dangerous areas heroically for the greater good of everybody involved. But again, that doesn't mean that in the end, whether it's Sudan, Southern Sudan, Libya, or a dozen other places, you're going to get success. As we know, you don't. And therefore, it's very important to have certain organizing elements. The ones that we're proposing include, and Mark Green ran through them briefly, first and foremost, U.S. leadership. Secondly, unity of what amounts to governance. It would be a multinational authority, an international one, again with American, Egyptian, Israeli, other Arab state, and European roles of participation under an international contact group with a similar number of, we basically say G20 minus the Russians and Chinese participation. This participation all voluntary. And Tom can talk about, because he knows the subject far better than anybody else, the legal bases, or bases plural, that this could be set up under. But it's very important that this be relatively independent, like the international role in Kosovo after 1995, which was successful in large part because it wasn't a UN operation, it was just endorsed by the UN. Again, this would have a security component, a policing force that would have at least some American personnel involved. It would have to coordinate with the Israelis because they will continue to have Israeli security concerns in Gaza as long as there is a Hamas presence. And our assumption is, and I want to underline this, I'm getting into the day before after having told everybody I wouldn't get into the day before, there will be a Hamas presence in Gaza, okay? There is a Hamas presence, an armed Hamas presence, and an ideological presence and a political presence of Hamas in the West Bank. But there's a huge difference between Hamas before October 6th, and particularly Hamas on October 7th in Gaza, and Hamas in West Bank. The latter is manageable. The former turned out to be metastasizing. So that's a very important element, the security. But beyond security, governance, reconstruction, humanitarian, and other issues that Tom will talk about are all part of the plan and all have to be done by this authority. One reason for that is, and this is something we learned very successfully in Bosnia and that I was involved in, and very unsuccessfully in Lebanon after the 2006 war and UN Resolution 1701, which I was also involved in, and they were diametrically opposite conclusions. Bosnia worked because everything was placed under one authority and was linked. Explicitly in the Dayton Accords, and then in UN Resolution 1031, the international community said, our willingness to help rebuild, reconstruct, and support the governance and all the good things in Bosnia will be dependent upon the people of Bosnia accepting the terms of the security, the ceasefire, and other elements. That is, you can't have two separate things. That's what happened with 1701, tragically, in Lebanon. We went out specifically to Stockholm right after the war was over and pledged the international community $6 billion to rebuild Lebanon. Most of that money eventually got there, but we did not tie it in any way with any authority, with any legal language or anything else to maintaining the provisions of 1701, which in and of themselves were good security provisions. They just were never executed. So we want to avoid that here. Finally, just a technical thing on page 17, we may have misinterpreted the way the Qataris have provided funding for Gaza, and that was pointed out when people reviewed this. Beyond that, I'll stop here, Marissa, and turn it over to Tom.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Jeffrey. I'm going to turn it over to you, Tom, to perhaps walk us through the arrangement of what the multinational authority looks like. Ambassador Jeffrey just mentioned that this will be supervised and monitored by the International Contact Group. Who are the members of this contact group? Who are you going to let in and out, basically? And then finally, in the interim period, before this M&A is set up, which probably will take a few weeks, who will be in control? Your report mentioned a few options, and then one of them was Israel being the occupying power. We just heard from Mary Beth about how triggering this word is in the region. So if you can walk us through the technicalities of what this looks like.
Thank you very much, Marissa, and thank you very much to the Wilson Center and to the Atlantic Council for sponsoring today's event. This really is the product of a number of us who have decades of experience dealing with post-conflict situations. I was an international lawyer. I was the first deputy in the State Department Office of War Crimes Issues, delving into humanitarian law and the accountability after the wars of Bosnia, Kosovo, Rwanda, and many other places. And then it headed up post-war planning on Iraq for the State Department. We all know how that went. And then as well involved in a number of issues as the Department of Homeland Security Deputy Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism Policy, working closely with Israel, with the Palestinian Authority, with Jordan, Egypt, and other countries in the region to deal with Hamas and other terrorist threats. So the folks in our group quite literally have seen it all, the good, the bad, and otherwise. But to go to your question, Marissa, there are two things that motivated our approach to this. The first is that a long-term Israeli Defense Force occupation of Gaza is in no one's interest. It's not in Israel's interest. We heard that from many Israelis, military and civilian. It's certainly not in the interests of the people of Gaza or the Palestinians generally. It's even not in the interest of the United States because of what it would do for the long-term security of the region and the reputation of close allies, including Israel. But the second thing is, as Secretary of State Blinken said, is we need to prevent Hamas's return to power. We have already seen this starting up again in the relative power vacuum that now exists in Gaza City and north and central Gaza. And this ought to be an extremely urgent concern of the international community. I cannot emphasize enough that the losses, the sacrifices, the deaths of so many innocents starting on October 7 and since then cannot be allowed to have Hamas return to leadership in Gaza. So this really does need to be an international priority. And if there's anything that any of us have learned in this business, it's that fast, cheap, and easy does not work. And so we came to the conclusion as we looked at this, and we've been working on this for 6 months. We consulted, as Ambassador Jeffrey said, with American officials past and present, Israeli officials past and present. We consulted with Palestinian Americans, with people from the region who have extensive experience dealing with post-conflict situations, terrorism, humanitarian aid, and so forth. I mean, we take responsibility for our plan, and many of these conversations, as you would appreciate, were under the Chatham House rule, so we respect the confidences, but we certainly benefited from even greater experience than we have in a lot of these areas. One of the fundamental key points is the need for American leadership at this time. All of us of a certain age lived through the moments when American presidents took a look at a situation that had created an international crisis and realized that the United States needed to be, as President Biden has said in this case, the indispensable nation. We looked at how President Bush 41 put together the international coalition that liberated Kuwait from Saddam Hussein's invasion. We looked at what President Clinton did to pull together the coalition that stabilized Bosnia and later Kosovo. We took a look at how President Bush 43 put together the coalition that went into Iraq, smaller than it should have been, undoubtedly. And we took a look at what President Obama did in pulling together the Defeat ISIS coalition that was ably led by, among other people, Brett McGurk, by Ambassador Jeffrey, and so many others. We are at exactly that kind of moment today, and anyone who has the appreciation that we do for President Biden and his deep experience and deep contacts with the leaders of Europe, the Middle East, our Asia-Pacific allies and others, there's no doubt that this is exactly the moment that this administration is called for the president to take leadership, to say, as Ambassador Jeffrey has said, we're going to put some skin in the game, we're going to make this work, but we're also never going to go back to the way the world was on October 6th. Let me mention the legal basis for taking this kind of action, because we did spend some time going through all of the legal alternatives. What we would recommend in the first instance is trying for a one-time only United Nations Security Council resolution under Chapter 7 authority, modeled on UNSCR 1031, which authorized the Office of the High Representative and the international force to go into Bosnia. We recognized a couple of very important truths about this. You cannot let this process be held up by Russian or Chinese intransigence within the Security Council. But on the other hand, there are certainly arguments to be made as to why they should go along with this kind of a resolution. But if not, then there need to be other plans. We included in our report, Marissa, all of the building blocks for what a Security Council resolution could look like, but we didn't bake the cake because I know the pride of the State Department Legal Advisor's Office. They would obviously want to do this in a way tuned to the present situation, but the building blocks are there. The second possible way to legitimize this kind of multinational authority is by a delegation of authority from the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. There is a case to be made, and we could make it, but American officials and other officials in the region could make it to Ramallah as to why it's in their interest to authorize a multinational authority to temporarily administer Gaza and to allow that to be the basis for this to proceed. The third option is we should recognize that for the moment at least, and God forbid Hamas does not come back, but Israel, to the extent it is exerting military power and authority in certain parts of Gaza, even today, has the international legal responsibility under the Hague Conventions and other international law as the occupying power. One option, therefore, which builds on the lawyer's argument for the basis for the coalition provisional authority in Iraq, would be for Israel to formally hand off its occupying power authority to the multinational authority and the international contact group, because we cannot see any benefit in Israel retaining occupying the power authority for Gaza. But then the final option, which again builds on international experience, is for the United States to take the lead in drafting the charter for the international contact group that would then attract support and be done in consultation with countries like Israel, Egypt, Jordan, European countries, other Arab countries, and thereby gain the international legitimacy of many countries coming together to deal with a regional security threat. The United Nations Charter has always assumed there would be regional efforts to establish security, and it is to us one of the most obvious things in the world that countries in the region and countries like the United States and Europe and our other allies need to exert a regional approach, exactly as Mary Beth Long has said everyone is looking for. So those are the ways we get the legitimization of this multinational authority. There have been, as many of us have lived through, many international contact groups. We actually found a study that said that there have been something on the order of 70 of these set up for different crises around the world. Certainly with what Ambassador Jeffrey has led with the Defeat ISIS Coalition and current officials like Brett McGurk and others in the administration have extensive experience with running international contact groups. They are consensus but not unanimity. They are ways of bringing countries together even if they disagree on other issues or other problems around the world. They can come together and work to address the challenges of Gaza. And they would be the group to which this multinational authority would formally report. We spent a good deal of time studying historical examples. The example of the Office of the High Representative in Bosnia is the one that we believe is most closely suited for this situation. This achieves, in many respects, many of the important goals that are relevant to Gaza. The first, and I want to emphasize what Ambassador Jeffrey said about the importance of linkage. It is absolutely essential that one authority have the ability to say what needs to be done in the policing and civilian security sphere, but also in the economic redevelopment sphere, in the oversight and management of Gaza's economy. All of these elements need to be brought together in order to achieve the kinds of physical and social reconstruction that the Gazan people deserve. There are several aspects of this that are worth stressing. The first is governance. Who gets appointed to what positions? One of the things that we did, including consultations with people who have worked in or with Gaza, but also we benefited considerably from some excellent opinion polling over decades to understand public opinion. And there are people in Gaza that the international community can work with who are not loyal to Hamas and its ideology of the destruction of the State of Israel. But many of those people have obviously not been able to come forward or have tilted their behavior, thoughts, and actions to the prevailing winds in order simply that their families might get along. There are people in Gaza that the international community can work with, and many of those have experience in governance and can help serve to provide a basis for local consultations, bringing people together at a local level and representing the people of Gaza directly, first to a multinational authority, and then eventually, as Jim said, they will be standing on their own feet and able to represent themselves. The second aspect of what the multinational authority has to have is control over the economy. Gaza, up until now, has largely functioned as an arm of Hamas, which exacted payments from individual Gazans who worked in Israel. They were shaken down for cash coming back into the territory after working to feed their families. And as well, Hamas had considerable control over smuggling revenues, and we have also seen how much of that revenue was devoted to efforts like building tunnels and rocket factories and other things that we would argue are not in the long-term interests of the people of Gaza. The amount of corruption that went on in Gaza is underappreciated in the United States. But we've taken a look at how successful models, and I have to say some less successful models, handled this problem, and so we put forward some very detailed recommendations. I built on some work done by my Atlantic Council colleagues in how a stablecoin system can move Gaza away from a cash-based economy that is prone to corruption towards one that is open, transparent, and frankly, if we'd had the technology to do it in Iraq, we would have used that. The next thing, as Jim said, is there needs to be coordination of humanitarian aid. An international policing force would be certainly better suited to do this than the Israeli Defense Forces, because you can tailor an international force for precisely the capability you need to oversee the safe, fair, and secure distribution of humanitarian aid. Israeli military experts will tell you the IDF is not built for such a purpose. But an international policing force could, because frankly, we have the experience. The United States has this experience, other countries have this experience. It would be better to apply that to secure distribution of humanitarian aid. And finally, the authority needs to have the ability to control the physical and social reconstruction of Gaza. This includes, as I've sat in meetings and watched U.S. and international officials turn off the aid to local leaders and warlords who thought that they could game the system to their advantage and undermine international stabilization efforts. And they quickly found out in the success stories they could not do that. But if you have an international development authority that does not have the security capabilities, that is simply not possible. And countries will not contribute the billions of dollars we all know it will take if Hamas or others like it are in charge and another war is in the offing. There will not be reconstruction, physical or social, in Gaza without a multinational authority that brings all of these elements together. And so, Marissa, this is the outline of our plan. We have studied every kind of success and failure going back to the occupations of Germany and Japan after World War II. People need to be reminded the occupation of Germany took 4 years, the occupation of Japan took 7, but planning for the occupation of Germany started in the spring of 1943, a 2-year lead time. Japan started a little bit later than that. But we've gotten a little better over time. I sat in a meeting in the State Department in the spring of, it was either 1994 or 1995, and I was assured that there was no possible way the Balkans could be stabilized, age-old conflicts, a civil war, the Europeans aren't with us, nobody will commit to this. And then in June of 1995, Ambassador Holbrooke took everybody out to Mount Weather, sat them down. The planning started for what became Dayton, and within 7 months, the Office of the High Representative was administering Bosnia. The international force had secured stability, and Bosnia is far from perfect, but the country is not at civil war. And the 200,000 who died, those who lived on, have seen a much better future than they were having during that period. That is exactly the kind of U.S. leadership we need in this moment. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. I think you will find a very wide audience for U.S. leadership in the region. There were always complaints in the last few years, in particular from regional leaders, and I'm sure, Mary Beth, you've had some of these conversations, that the U.S. is not engaged. There are longstanding historic conflicts, including the Palestinian-Israel conflict, that only the United States can lead. And so I'm sure that this will be welcomed. But I want to circle back to one of the points that Mary Beth made, and we've been receiving questions from our online audience, and we've had 500 registrants for today. So there's a lot of questions coming in, which goes back to what the regional leaders, from the Arab world, the key U.S. allies, what they will have to say about this particular plan, how you will engage them in the various roles that you assign to them in the report. And the report, by the way, is online on the Wilson Center website as well as the Atlantic Council website. We constantly hear from Arab foreign ministers, most recently in Riyadh at the World Economic Forum, that there needs to be a political horizon for a two-state solution, and that the United States has to lead this, and only then do we start talking about the day after. Is this something that the United States can also do in parallel to the stabilization effort, given the humanitarian needs of the Palestinians in Gaza, as well as the security needs that Israel prioritizes? Ambassador Jeffrey.
You just put your finger, Mercer, on the dysfunctionality of this region, okay? As one who would urge, not in this report, but outside of this report, and not with my partners, but myself, the United States to be doing exactly that, and to be pressing for the least bad option. It isn't good, but it's by far the least bad option, which is a two-state solution or a path towards a two-state solution. Sure, you should do both. But if you try to hold hostage the dramatic needs of 2.4 million people to some kind of political process that the international community has been dealing with since 1948 and has actually had a plan since the mid-1990s and yet has not achieved it, you're condemning those people to near starvation and living in rubble for years. This is classic leveraging a good thing in order to get a political thing. I happen to like the political thing myself, but that's a personal view. What I know is a lot of people don't like that political view, and it's going to get in the way of doing what needs to be done.
Tom?
Well, and this, I think, highlights one of the great challenges of this moment. The United States government and many others in the region see the wisdom of a two-state solution. But let's be frank that the Israeli people right now, not just the current Israeli government, but the Israeli people by and large, will not agree to that. it occurred to us as we were, well, two things occurred to us as we were drafting this. First, many people came to us and said, could you solve the problems of the West Bank at the same time? And we said, no, that's not a good idea. In fact, it's an impossible idea. Figure that out separately. This is absolutely urgent. And the most important thing is that if we get the multinational authority in place and have it work in the way we've described for a period of time, you actually create the potential for a considerably better approach to the ultimate resolution of whether it's two states or any other kind of solution. It will be considerably better after this has worked for 3 years than it is today. We all took note of the conversation a few months ago between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu, in which President Biden tried to outline ideas that many of us have heard about demilitarizing a Palestinian state and a host of other ideas, all of which Prime Minister Netanyahu rejected. Part of the reason we came to understand why Israelis feel so strongly about that is they looked over at Gaza and they saw Hamas. They look at the West Bank and they see the potential of a Hamas takeover. And so the current situation has created this impasse between Israelis generally and Americans and Arab leaders and others. There has to be a way of not just buying time, but actually improving the situation and having a multinational authority administer Gaza, get the IDF out of the business of trying to oversee humanitarian aid distribution, and preventing Hamas's return is actually going to create the possibility for a much more favorable discussion of what happens to the Palestinian people afterwards. So this is the way to get us to a better discussion several years from now.
Mary Beth, do you think the U.S. government has the capacity to lead these parallel tracks? And how do you have that conversation with our key Arab allies? I mean, you talked about the importance of narrative and how important that piece is for many of the Arab governments.
Militarily and experience-wise and organizationally and bureaucratically, we have the capacity. The question is this the best use of our capacity? And is there political will during an election period in which using this kind of capacity, I think, will be a difficult discussion? And the repercussions of the optics, frankly, of America once again, if I were the Iranians or the Palestinians and others meddling and bringing its version of stability, paren, on behalf of the Israelis, into a region in which it's not poorly, it's more than Europe and some of these other experiences. It has a huge cultural disconnect, a huge historic disconnect, brings the specter of colonization again, a huge religious disconnect, a language disconnect. It is different than some of the other experiences we've had. Do we have the raw physical capacity? Absolutely. It's interesting. I listen to that, and I want to throw out on the capacity and leadership the question: where's the Arab League? Where's the GCC? Okay, Arab leaders, we need leadership here. Those organizations have not taken robust rules in many respects from a Western point of view on solving regional problems. Is it time to put their feet to the fire? As much as the G7 or anybody else, these guys are on the front lines. Why aren't we asking for Arab leadership and for Arab ideas? And we are, I'm sure, but I think a little more pressure along those lines might be more useful. But again, do we have the raw capacity? With many perils, yes.
If I could just
Yeah,
add,
of course.
we're a little bit, and particularly in this election year, deer in the headlights because of the election and the drama of it stealing all the oxygen from every room. But the good news is, folks, in less time than we've been in this war since October 7th, we will have an American president, no elections for 4 years, and that president will not be worried about getting reelected. And that's a far better environment for decisions than the mess we're in right now.
Thank you, Ambassador Jeffrey. So we have a number of questions that came online through our online audience, so I'd like to turn it over to some of these questions here and then also open the floor for questions from our in-person audience. So what will countries like the United Arab Emirates and Egypt want in return for spending money in Gaza's reconstruction? Tom, do you want to take that?
Well, the first thing is to ask what do they, or indeed any country in the region, get by investing in this kind of a solution. The first thing they benefit from is an end to one of the most destructive conflicts that the region has seen. The second thing is it opens up economic opportunities and security opportunities that the Abraham Accords helped some countries see their way through prior to October 7, and there was some hopeful trajectory. If only we could bring the Palestinian-Israeli solution into a better situation. But countries were entering into the Abraham Accords because they saw it was in their interest to do so. We need to return to that thinking that by making the kinds of financial and security commitments, that they will end up benefiting their own security, their own economic development, their own prosperity, and their own social development. But they have absolutely as much at stake in a secure and lasting solution to the conflict between Israel and Hamas that all other countries have.
Thank you. Jim, do you want to?
Only that, and I'll bring in for the first time Iran. A stable Gaza is not only a prerequisite to, I think, the progress on the two-state solution, it also, assuming Hamas is no longer operating there, makes it highly unlikely that there would be another and potentially even bigger October 7th launched by Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranians, and the rest of the axis of resistance. And that's important for the region because the region has been drawn into this war, as we saw with the Iranian attack and the Israeli retaliation, and this makes everybody very, very nervous.
Absolutely. So you mentioned Iran. There's a question that zooms into the role of Iran, but given that the Middle East is a key theater for great power competition, what about Russia and China as well, particularly when you're talking about a Chapter 7 UN resolution? Jim, Tom, Mary Beth? I'm opening it up for anyone.
Russia certainly has its hands full right now, and one would hope they would not choose to meddle in any other trouble spots of the world. But I think we've got to recognize that the role of Russia would not be benign in this situation. And indeed, in the plan, we have sections devoted to acknowledging there was a time, which may have passed, when Israel had better relations with Moscow than Washington did. But in reality, a large part of what I think the statecraft of the moment is ways of ensuring that Russia and China do not become spoilers. I do a great many television interviews where people ask me, what do I think about China's approach to trying to work out an arrangement between Tehran and Riyadh. And I said, China just sees both of them as oil suppliers, and it doesn't want its petrol stations shooting missiles at each other. There is actually a reason why China ought to prefer stability and peace in the Middle East, because that's essential for their economic development. But I just don't think, based on experience, we can count on positive contributions. If they wanted to make positive contributions, that would be a blessing, but we just can't count on it.
I've talked to senior Russian and Chinese experts in the last couple of months on this plan generally in the Middle East. And I'm a bit more optimistic. First of all, Russia's main focus is maintaining its sorry surrogate, Assad, in Syria, and this thing has endangered Assad's hold, let alone any hopes that Assad will get the rest of the country. And as Tom said, Israel is a key player there, particularly on Syria, and there's a deal to be made. Again, Tom summed it up with the Chinese. That's exactly what they told me, not quite as blunt, but actually almost as blunt. But I would notice there's a whole series in the last couple of years of UN resolutions where Russia has voted against and China has abstained.
And then both the Russians and Chinese, for whatever these talks are worth, have also hosted various Palestinian factions in the last few months. Nothing came out of it, but they are, of course, playing that role. How you connect the dots is a different story. Mary Beth, do you want to add anything to
No,
this?
I agree with the gentleman. I actually think it's an opportunity. They've both also been looking for footholds and a role in the region, and I think trying the goal is to keep them from being spoilers. But I think if we're creative, certainly the region is doing business with both and will continue to do business with both. And to the extent they have better relationships with both in those arenas, and to the extent it's a regional initiative run by the Arabs, I think that there would be a real inkling to participate.
Thank you. Let's turn to questions from our audience. Barbara Slavin, right here, and then Marina.
Hi, Barbara Slavin from the Stimson Center. I look forward to reading the report. I have a couple of questions, having not read it. Who would be in this international contact group? I mean, it would seem to me that beyond some Arab states and the United States and some Europeans, you would have to have perhaps China to give it heft. And you know, with all due respect, I mean, Bosnia, this was during a unipolar moment. The region has changed. The world has changed. The United States is not seen in the same way by the region. Who would contribute troops to this stabilization force besides the United States? And what are the concerns that I think, whether it's Biden or Trump, would have about the kind of thing that we saw in Beirut in 1983, which no one mentioned, when we had a supposed peace force got involved in a Lebanese conflict, Lebanese-Israeli-Syrian conflict, and we lost 241 Marines. I don't know that there's an appetite for American boots on the ground. Thanks.
Yeah, there's never an appetite for American boots on the ground. That's the assumption that I've made, having been involved 4 or 5 times on getting American boots on the ground, more or less successfully. That's the first thing. I would say that, okay, aside from really bad tactical decision-making on the part of the people in Beirut, be it embassies, be it the French military, be it the American military in 1983, the other problem was that wasn't a core national security interest. This is. That does make a difference. We lost a hell of a lot more than 240 people in Iraq, and we stayed the course. You're actually absolutely right that it was easier from the standpoint of almost 30 years distance to put together Bosnia in the multipolar moment. But boy, it didn't look easy at the time, Barbara. And the other thing is, okay, multipolar world, America is either pivoting or it's in decline. And look what happens. President Biden picks up the phone and says, Bibi, you're going to change 180 degrees your humanitarian approach to Gaza. And right now, bad things are going to happen. And what happens? Nobody else could do this. For months, the entire international community was bemoaning correctly Israeli hesitancy, Israeli blockage of humanitarians, and it all changed overnight because one man made a phone call. That same man told his military commanders to stop a major Iranian missile, drone, and rocket attack on Israel, and what happened? It got stopped. I think we're as unipolar now as we've ever been when we want to.
So who would be in this force?
Oh yeah, sure, Tom.
Tom, the ICG.
Well, okay, so if you look at who has been with us in these previous moments, those are the people I would call first. If I were writing a list of phone calls for President Biden to make, if the President of the United States tells the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, we're going in, we want you to be with us, certainly from every contact I've had, I think that would be a favorable response. President Macron of France has already spoken publicly about the determination of his government. That would be another top call. You can go through the list. Even the Australians responded to us when we asked them to join us in Iraq, when few other countries would. We've already spoken up here about the importance of, as quickly as possible, consulting deeply with the Egyptians in every aspect, security, diplomacy, and otherwise. And I can't think of anyone, any U.S. official beyond Bill Burns, who spent more time talking with senior Egyptian leaders in recent weeks and months. The Emiratis have expressed strong interest in getting this situation turned around. And frankly, this is where U.S. planning and leadership can play a role. What is the best contribution for the UAE to bring to this resolving this crisis? The Chancellor of Germany, Germany has deep and significant relations with Israel for historical reasons we all remember, and a call for them to help stabilize this situation is something that I would anticipate the German people would respond well to this kind of a challenge. You're giving countries a chance to do something that, as Ambassador Jeffrey and Mary Beth and Marissa have described, people have been saying for decades that we need to do something to end this cycle of wars between Israel and the people of Gaza. When the president says, we're going in and we want you with us, I cannot believe that there will be a shortfall in people, in money, in troops to provide basic policing and oversee distribution of humanitarian aid. And this really is a moment that American presidents have risen to in the past, going back to 1990. This is now the turn of the Biden administration. And I could see why they would want to get this done and settled and start to see the benefits of this before the November election. I do want to, though, come back to one point that you and Ambassador Jeffrey discussed. We do anticipate Hamas is going to try to undermine this. A lot of us remember what the insurgency tried to do in killing Sergio de Mello in Iraq in the Canal Hotel. But one of the first and most important things is this is exactly what the planners of the military and civilian authority, we are a lot smarter now than we were in 2003. And there are a host of measures and technologies that I know from my government service and others as well that can be done. But yes, I expect there will be an attempt by Hamas to drive out an international authority. We need to be prepared for it. We need to be resilient. And frankly, in the recruiting of the people to go work in this, everybody needs to understand exactly how this is going to play out. Hamas will try once. They may try twice. I actually don't think they'll get a third try at this. But we need to expect that this is among the things that have to be planned for, and there are ways of addressing that. And one of them is, as we showed in Iraq, the resilience that we're not going to be driven from this. We are committed to this for our own national security reasons, as should the other countries involved in this coalition be committed.
If I may, Tom, just follow up on the members of the International Contact Group. Would Israel and the PA have a seat, or would they have more of an observer status?
Well, Israel, Egypt, countries like the United Arab Emirates and others would obviously be full-fledged members of the contact group. Israel has a strong opposition to the PA formally being a member of the contact group, but there are other ways of coordinating with and talking to the Palestinian Authority. In the plan, we make specific references. There are things that the multinational authority should look to the Palestinian Authority. For example, continuing to pay salaries of the people in Gaza that the Palestinian Authority has traditionally paid. The Palestinian Authority has traditionally helped fund electricity and water for Gaza. That kind of thing needs to continue, and there obviously has to be coordination. So it's undoubted that there will be working relationships that will involve Ramallah. It will also involve local Gazans, and I think that they are, as important, obviously, to the future of Gaza as the people in Ramallah are. And we have several sections in the report that I encourage people to read, and this was drafted by our colleague Bob Silverman, who had extensive experience in the provinces in Iraq, where frankly we did this better than we did in Baghdad. But bringing Palestinians together into this, it's absolutely essential that the people of Gaza have a voice in their own future, and this is a way of making that possible in ways that no other solution that we could come up with would allow. Hamas leadership does not give those people a voice, and obviously an IDF occupation is not the way to go for obvious reasons.
One reason that we didn't spell out, Barbara noticed it and others, we were very vague on who the members or likely members of this contact group or the multinational authority would be, is that we didn't want to make a decision one way or the other on the Palestinian Authority. It would be fine if they were a member of the contact group and or the multinational authority if all the parties could agree to it. Why not? But until we're sure that all the parties are agreed to it, we didn't want to, again, we didn't want to put anything in here that would be an immediate showstopper.
I assume that this will be a point that the Arab allies would insist on.
Yeah, very much so.
For sure. David and Marina, you can take turns.
I'm curious, publicly, the GCC states and other Arab countries have said, no way will they get involved in the reconstruction of Gaza if there is no commitment spelled out in great detail for a two-state solution.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're saying publicly. Mm-hmm. Now, do you have any reason to believe that they would disconnect a commitment and a political process for a two-state solution?
A, I think that they will stand by their words. B, I think, and I've seen them before, show a great deal of flexibility. Look at what we were discussing in 3 ways with the Israelis and the Saudis on movement towards a two-state solution before the 7th of October. I think that they may be willing to do something like that. But again, that's not something we worked into the plan. That's something that everybody has to decide. Do you want to fix Gaza? If you want to leverage or instrumentalize fixing Gaza for a longer-term solution, I can make a philosophical case that in the end that makes sense because Gaza will collapse again, Hamas will come back if you don't have a longer-term solution. I could accept that argument. I think that's what the GCC is saying. It's just that we don't want to get into that because we would immediately get into a larger issue that would immediately lead to people either saying no to this report or using the report as, well, see, they're advocating this, that, or the other thing. Essentially, people have to decide the larger context of repairing or stabilizing Gaza. This is a plan on how to stabilize Gaza, not to fix the Middle East.
And I think it's important in the discussions with those governments to lay the starkness of the alternative. It may not be possible to get to where they want to go in one step. Certainly, right now, there is absolutely no way the Israeli public will accept that step. And so the question then becomes, are you willing to condemn the 2.4 million people of Gaza to misery, to a level just above, or God forbid, just below starvation? Are you willing to prevent the reconstruction, physical and social, of Gaza because of something that is not achievable in the present political climate? If you want to condemn the people of Gaza to that kind of a life, that's not the way I understand the values of these Arab leaders. On the other hand, if we take this as a bridge that gets us to some better destination, then let us at least take this in one step and then continue to work on further steps. But it's not just good diplomacy, it's good security to say this actually gives you a hope of getting there, wherever there is in your mind. But right now you have no hope. And if you say we're not going to do anything to help the people of Gaza until the Israeli public changes its mind, you have condemned 2.4 million people to a terrible fate. And I don't think that's consistent with American values or interests, and I frankly don't think it's consistent with the values and interests of our Arab partners either.
There's a very telling chart in here of the GDP in Gaza and the West Bank. Roughly 2000, or a little bit beyond 2000, when both areas had been under Israeli occupation since 1967. The GDP was roughly the same, $1,300, a little bit less in Gaza, a little bit more in the West Bank. And by 2015, it was almost 3 times larger in the West Bank. That's what the people, totally apart from the wars and this terrible war on top of the others, that's what we all have condemned the people of Gaza to by letting Hamas run the place.
Mary Beth, do you want to add anything here?
I'll just add one little quick perspective. When you speak to the Gulf and the Egyptians and the Jordanians, I think there's every reason to believe that a path to, they chose that language because they heard us use it with NATO in order to buy time and to set parameters that will have to be achieved in order for you to go on to the next loop. So I'm very optimistic. We're focused like a laser beam on Gaza, and there's a nuance there that we keep missing, and that is there's 2.4 sitting in Gaza, and let's be honest, the world, including the Arab world, let it go this far because they didn't want to be involved because it's complicated. And part of the complicated is the Palestinian Authority next door and the almost 2 million, I think more than 2 million, of Palestinians sitting in Jordan. This is all a package in their minds about what do you do with this whole group rather than just carving out, because the last thing you want to do is make Gaza a better place than the West Bank or than what the Palestinians are living with in Jordan.
Or Lebanon.
Or Lebanon, or the other places. Yeah. So it's more complicated than just Gaza, I think, from a practical standpoint for them, which is why that insistence of a place for all the Palestinians, not just the 2.4, is language we have to be careful that we recognize that.
Thank you. Marina?
Yes. I have 2 quick questions. One is concerning how do you get the Palestinians involved in this process? When you were talking earlier about people with whom you consulted in the process, you talked about Palestinian American groups. Well, the diaspora is not exactly people from the region. It's a totally different. And when you seem to be talking about people appointed by this authority that's going to be created and so on. At which point do the Palestinians as a people get a voice in what this is happening? I mean, I know the idea of calling election right now is it's a bit premature, let me put it that way, but at which point you have real involvement by Palestinians. The second question is, I can sympathize with your desire not to combine or try to find a combined solution for both Gaza and the West Bank, but can you really separate them? In other words, how is the example of what's happening in the West Bank which is pretty horrific, except we don't talk to it, because what is happening in Gaza is much worse. People continue losing land, more settlers are moving, and so on. How is that going to influence the reaction of Gaza to whatever solution you're proposing?
Do you want to address the second one? I'll do the first one.
Yeah, although I'll then flip the second one to Tom because he's done work on it. Part of the plan is de-radicalization. Frankly, I don't see how you can do de-radicalization in Gaza if you don't have a political vision, and that political vision is not going back to where they were before. Again, we didn't address this in detail because it is beyond the specifics of the plan, and it would immediately lead to a debate about that rather than the plan. In terms of the people and the voice they have, Tom can take that, but Tom's also the expert on the de-radicalization plan as well.
We spent a lot of time trying to figure out under the leadership of President Bush 43 how to build democracy in Iraq. I don't need to tell this audience that was not entirely a success. But there are some important lessons that were developed out of that experience. I think we need to start by recognizing the political traumatization that existed in Gaza, exerted by Hamas and others, and frankly by the experience of everyday Gazans' encounters with Israel and how that changed for the worse over the past 40 or 50 years. We think it's important to start locally and to be able to work with local Gazans to build up some sense of responsive and representative, I will call it governance, but it doesn't start out that way. But it does start with local control, with local recommendations, with, as Ambassador Jeffrey has said, with the linkage between development and security. You can't have local security without having reconstruction, but you can't have reconstruction without having local security. This process, as we saw in the provinces of Iraq, takes time. It's labor intensive. It can't be done by simply writing policy memos from a Capitol building anywhere on the planet. It takes basic field work that frankly, USAID and others actually do have some positive experience. And frankly, there are many other programs like this run by European and increasingly by Arab governments to be able to set up and work through local ways of soliciting the views of local citizenry and seeing that those local views are reflected in governmental decisions. That is part of the challenge of actually running a multinational authority. The Coalition Provisional Authority is not a complete model of success, but it did have some successes. We recognize that you need to build these things up. If there's any experience out of the Balkans and out of Iraq, and frankly out of Gaza, it's the idea that prematurely rushing to elections is not a good idea. For this reason, one of the things that we were advised during the process of consulting with people in the development of the report was to pull together an annex that actually brought forth some of the lessons learned about what I will call de-radicalization, and I will be very clear in 1 minute exactly what I mean by that. Because we always heard examples, even when we were doing the planning for post-war Iraq. Denazification in Germany was a success. Well, it was a success in Japan. That actually conceals more truths than it reveals. Both of those were very complex undertakings, and as scholars of modern Germany will tell you, the denazification of Germany was not completed until the 1960s and the 1970s, more than a decade after complete West German independence. The challenges of trying to figure out what does de-radicalization mean in the Gazan context, I believe boils down to this core idea. There is no way that Hamas or Gaza is ever going to wipe out the state of Israel. And that is the thought analogous to supremacist ideologies in other parts of the world that the world needs to move past. There is no way Hamas will ever replace the state of Israel. If you recognize that truth, there are some other hard truths, which we list in the report, that it's not for us as former American officials, it's for the people of Gaza and the Palestinians generally to reach their own conclusions about a better way forward. There are things that a multinational authority could do to help, and that's what we advocate in our report. But the social change is ultimately going to come from Gazans, many of whom already exist and are living in Gaza and have these ideas, and some of them they express and others they have learned to keep to themselves. But we saw this in Iraq. We see something like this revealed in the opinion polling data from Gaza going back decades. The challenge is, as long as Hamas governs Gaza, those people will never get a say in the way Gaza is governed. And so that can change. That is exactly the kind of change that was brought about in Germany and was brought about in Japan, and have led to both of those countries being prosperous and successful democracies today. We need to be suitably modest about the challenges of Gaza, as we should have been going into Iraq. But the historical experience, when you have studied this and learned what I hope are the right lessons, give you the sense that this can be made better, and it's up to the international community to do what it can to help without making the mistakes that the United States made going into Iraq in 2003.
Thank you. So we are 5 minutes over. I want to thank you so much for your time today. And I know, Tom, in our conversations in the last few days, you mentioned that you and other authors, as well as Ambassador Jeffrey, are open to various reactions and feedback. And certainly that is our role here at the Wilson Center, to convene these essential discussions. So I thank you all for your time, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you all.
Thank you.